and welcome to another episode of TPAS Member Chat. Today I'm going to give Ongo's Chief Executive, Steve Hepworth, a call. Ongo has been part of the TPAS membership for a number of years now, and Steve's been part of Ongo since it was formed as North Lincolnshire Homes back in 2007, so there's a long history and a commitment to engagement there. I want to know what Steve's priorities are, how he and the rest of the sector are responding to the pandemic, and I'm also going to ask Steve which partners are essential to him right now. Hello Steve, and welcome to TPAS Member Chat. Thank you for joining me.
Morning Ray, great to be here.
First up Steve, I wanted to ask you on Member Chat, as I always do, I start kicking off with what's home like for you and how are you feeling right now?
Home's pretty good with 4 of us in the house, working hard to keep not social distance from each other, but making sure that we don't crowd each other too much and find our own ways to keep occupied. I'm working full time. One of the lads is continuing his university course, and my wife's keeping up with the gardening and the decorating. So all in all, things pretty good, and I do appreciate that. In a very fortunate position to be able to have a garden, so able to get outside and enjoy some of the spring sunshine that we've got.
So you're all keeping busy then, Steve?
Yep, trying to, and certainly work-wise has been very busy, probably like everyone in social housing at the moment. We've had to not only adapt to a new way of doing things, but also cope with lots of new challenges as well. So yeah, keeping busy, but trying to smile and trying to stay positive and find the positives in everything that we're doing.
Brilliant. I spoke to Tim Mills last week, one of your tenant board members, and he was really enthusiastic about a Facebook Live session that you did with tenants. He said that, you had over 80 questions on there. As the person in the hot seat, what kind of questions came up, and were there any surprises, ideas? What really surprised you about what came out?
Yeah, I think some of the stuff was expected. Lots of questions and concerns about rent payments and what kind of help and assistance we can give to people. Probably some of the stuff that surprised me was that tenants were, particularly our involved tenants, very interested in how we were coping with the home working challenge and the staff engagement challenge, making sure that we're not only looking after the well-being of tenants, but also considering the well-being of staff, and there's little things that we can do to make sure that we keep people positive and engaged and keep communications going through the period. That's probably the most important thing that we've been focusing on.
And did you find out anything about your residents and communities through all this process of engaging that you didn't know before?
I think probably one of the most telling things for us, we identified all of our elderly and other markers of vulnerability to coronavirus within our tenant group and started ringing round people. Made about 3,000 phone calls up to now. Mm-hmm. The most telling thing was probably the way that the lockdown and the isolation has exposed social isolation and vulnerabilities that wouldn't be there if people who are otherwise fit and able to get out and about would engage with people and engage with the community. But because they're staying at home to protect their health, or in some cases the health of a family member, it really does bring that isolation thing into focus. We've reacted to that in a number of ways by programming regular phone calls for some people, putting some food deliveries in place for others. And I think it just shows that how, when society changes, we've got to find different ways to make connections with people. If those normal connections, like going to the community cafe or going to the library or whatever it may be for the individual, if those connections aren't there, it's really important to replace those with different connections that still add value to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And those connections and things, how we were watching how the social housing sector are responding through this. Ongo, you're coming out as one of the organisations that are particularly investing in engagement and doing innovative sessions such as your Facebook Live session. How are you seeing the response from the social housing sector?
I think it probably has been a real, maybe a wake-up call is the wrong phrase, but it brings home to us what's possible and things that we might have struggled with as a sector previously around, how do we talk to tenants through using social media, or how do we really push the envelope of work being what we do, not work being an office that we go to. And I don't think any of us would have chosen a crisis like this to bring those things front and centre, but it has brought them front and centre, and I think it's shown lots of us in the sector that we can work from home. We don't have to be in office locations, and what really matters is the connections that we make with our tenants and our communities. And if using social media in the crisis works, then using social media at other times works as well. That's where lots of people spend their time and do their communicating with friends and family and wider groups of interest. So why shouldn't it be the place that we also do our engagement with wide groups of people as well?
Oh, would you say it's fair to say that the engagement agenda will come out well from this situation? Do you think that organisations will be investing in engagement, or do you think that that's not necessarily the case?
I think it's probably going to be mixed. I hope that we, as a sector, use this unprecedented set of circumstances, use it as an opportunity to think differently. If I can, and I was doing Facebook sessions with tenants generally before the crisis anyway. We're doing them slightly differently now with groups that we wouldn't have necessarily done before. But if I did a Facebook Live session on 9th of April aimed at our general tenant population, over 1,700 people saw that Facebook post. Not everyone engaged with it, but nearly 300 people clicked into it and read the comments and had a look at it. Now, you can't get that level of reach through doing things in a weekly meeting with people. Mm-hmm. So I think it just shows to us what is possible. I still do think there's a place for face-to-face contact. I think that speaking to people one-on-one and speaking to people in small groups and having two-way conversations is much easier face-to-face. And I think our tenants and residents still deserve that. So I'm certainly not advocating that as a sector we totally move away from personal contact and into digital means of communication. But I think what we need to do is recognise the advantages in reach that social media and other digital ways of engaging gives us, and just see it as the new normal, whether it's in the period of crisis or just in normal business.
No, that's a fair point. It's a new normal for us all, isn't there? What can we just discuss kind of corporate priorities over the next 3 months, and in particular, as the chief executive of landlord, I'm sure everyone has these headaches. Is that gas safety, backlog of repairs, etc. How are you getting through all that? What are your corporate priorities really, just in a short but long term right now of the next 3 months?
Yeah, well, we identified 3 priorities fairly early on in the crisis for us at Ongo, and they were: number 1, to keep our customers and staff and colleagues as safe as possible. Number 2 is to make sure that we provide essential services for people to keep them safe, and that includes things like gas safety checks and fire safety checks. And our 3rd priority is to make sure that the business operates effectively both through the crisis and then coming out of the crisis, that we're in a position to move back to a full service delivery very quickly. In terms of gas safety checks, we're obviously adapting the approach, but we are still offering the safety check as normal. Where people are self-isolating for a short period of time because somebody in the household might be ill, we're just rebooking the appointment for a couple of weeks' time. Much more difficult when people are self-isolating for the longer period, but we're still taking the same approach. We're just rebooking the appointment. So if someone's self-isolating for 12 weeks, we'll just rebook the appointment for 13 weeks' time. It will mean that some properties will exceed the 12-month limit. We're obviously keeping a careful check on that, and we're also being very aware, and certainly we've started talking inside the organisation this week, that there may come a time when, if the lockdown carries on for longer, or if certain groups of vulnerable people are advised individually to stay in lockdown for longer, then the longer a gas appliance goes without being serviced, the risk increases. So we do have safe ways of working. We will communicate that to tenants, and we're pretty confident that if we need to gain access to a property to do essential repair work or essential safety work, then we've got a safe way of working that can not put people at risk as we do the work. And I think it's something that will have to change as we react to wherever we end up with the medical and government advice in weeks and possibly months to come. And it may be that we just have to find ways of carrying out the work that keeps people safe as we do it, because leaving a gas service a few weeks over the 12-month period is probably not a massive issue. But at what point does it become a really big and dangerous issue? 3 months over, 4 months over, 5, 6, 7, 8 months over, and none of us know where we're going to be. So I think we just have to prepare for the worst, put plans in place, and if that means that we have to do things differently, then we'll just have to react and do them differently.
It's a fine balance to be made, isn't there, Steve?
Yeah, definitely, and there's no right or wrong answer in these things. The balancing the health and safety of the individual person, but thinking about the general health and safety of people in the wider community. And we all know why we service gas appliances every 12 months. It's to protect the individual tenants in that property, but also to protect the people around them, because none of us want to see a gas incident that could have been prevented if a safety check or an essential repair had been carried out.
No, absolutely. You don't want a crisis from a crisis, do you?
No, definitely not.
My final question, an opportunity for you to kind of give a shout out really for any organisations or partnerships that have worked particularly well with Ongo over this time.
There's probably too many to list individually, but we've certainly had a great response from our suppliers that are providing us with the necessary food and other basics to enable us to package up our Helping Hands food parcels, and we're delivering nearly 500 of those a week. But I think if I was going to give a shout out to anyone, it would be to our residents, our tenants, and our colleagues across Ongo, who are all coming together to achieve some really fantastic results through just different ways of working and different ways of supporting each other. So yeah, a big shout out to the colleagues and partners that we work with, but a bigger shout out to our tenants and our teams across the organisation, who have been absolutely fantastic. We've had nothing but positive responses, and we've just found ways to achieve things that we might not have thought about before the crisis, but people are just getting on with it, buckling down and doing a great job.
Well, that's brilliant to hear. It's people power, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, and it certainly shows that, you know, connections in communities and connections between people are massively important, no more so than now. And sometimes that's connections between our colleagues and members of the community. Sometimes it's connections between individual members of the community coming together to help each other. But it certainly does show what's possible.
Well, that's a wonderful end to TPAS chat. Thanks so much for your time then, Steve.
Thanks, Ray. Great to chat.